amount of stitches, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to knit this adjustable dog sweater. This sweater has a leash opening and also long sleeves. This is knitted for a rat terrier dog. It's quite big. In order to knit this sweater, I used 2 skeins, so 200 grams, but I have some left from the second skein, and I used the pair of circular needles. So, as I said, this tutorial is for a dog sweater which is size adjustable. If you follow some simple maths calculations, you can knit it for your dog. Especially if the dog is with you, it's very easy to knit it. So let's start. This is a top-down sweater. It's seamless, so I'm going to use circular needles, and I'm going to start working on my project from top down. So I am going to cast on the stitches that I need for the neck of the dog, meaning that I need to cast stitches for the perimeter of the neck of the dog, not only one side. It's always a good idea to create a gauge swatch before you start your knitting project in order to know how many stitches to cast on. For my dog, because I know the measurements of my dog, and I have already created a swatch for the circular needles for the rib stitch and for the stockinette stitch that I am going to use. I know that in order to get 10 centimeters of my rib stitch for the width, I need to cast on 16 stitches. Now we will need to remember our maths in order to calculate how many stitches we will need to cast on for the neck of the dog. So what we are going to use is the proportional sum rule, or the rule of 3, which means that in order to increase, let's say in this case, the centimeters, we will also need to increase the stitches. And now I will show you how to calculate this. So what we know is that with the yarn that I'm going to use and the needles that I'm going to use, and I'm saying that because it's different if you change the yarn or the needles, so every time you have to depend on your gauge swatch. In order to get 10 centimeters of my project, I will need 16 stitches. I know that the neck of my dog is 37 centimeters, and I need to know how many stitches I will need for these 37 centimeters. In order to calculate this, what you need to do is to multiply the centimeters I need with the stitches and then divide by 10. But if you don't want to trouble yourself with this, there are online calculators that you can do it, or you can use a calculator. So I have already done the maths, and I know that I need 59.2 stitches. As a rule, if the decimal number you get from the calculations is less than 5, you go down to the previous number. So here I'm supposed to use 59 stitches. If the decimal is bigger than 5, then we round up to the next number. Because I'm going to use the 1 by 1 rib stitch for the neck of the sweater, I need an even number of stitches, so 60, and also I'm going to add an extra stitch for the joint of the two sides in order to create the neck, and 2 more stitches which I always add when I cast on in the Greek way, and which I am going to drop when I start knitting my first row. So I am going to cast on 63 stitches in total, but for the neck of the sweater I am just going to use 60 of them for the 1 by 1 rib stitch pattern. But I will show you what I mean when we start knitting the neck. And now I'm going to cast on my stitches in the Greek way. Of course, you can use any way you prefer in order to cast on your stitches. Again, these are the measurements for my dog. Please check the measurements of your dog. The best way to do it, if the dog is with you, unfortunately I don't have the dog here, is to check with the dog. In order to cast on my stitches, I'm going to use my method. There is a video tutorial on how to do it. Please check it if you like, or you can use the method you prefer. I'm just going to cast on some stitches here, and what I do is wrap the yarn around my thumb and then create a loop. When I cast on my stitches in this way, my stitches are cast on in pairs of 2, as you can see. Please cast on the stitches you need, and I will meet you then. So I have cast on the stitches that I need for the sweater, for the neck of the dog sweater. I used circular needles. As you can see, my needles have a very long cable, which is difficult to control while knitting, and I'm going to use something called a magic loop. That means that I'm going to pull my cable into different places while I'm knitting. And now I'm ready to knit the neck. I'm going to knit 1 and purl 1, but I'm going to do something different for the first 2 rows of my knitting in order to give a more elastic texture to my project. Also, I am going to knit in the Greek way, but if you prefer to use another way to knit your project, you can do it. Just follow the rest of my instructions. So I have wrapped my yarn around my neck. My cast on stitches are on my left hand and the working needle on my right hand. And I'm going to start by knitting the first stitch, but then, because as I said, I would like more flexibility to my project, I'm not going to knit the purl stitches. I'm just going to slip them on the working needle. So the first thing that I am going to do is to bring my yarn in front of my working needle, my right needle, and then slip the next stitch on the needle, on the right needle. And then I'm going to place my yarn behind the right needle, cast on in the Greek way. I'm going to undo these 2 stitches. So for my last stitches, What I'm going to do is to knit one, and now I'm going to also purl the last one. I'm not going to skip it, so I'm purling the last one because this is my last stitch. I'm going to undo the other two. So you should also do the same depending on the size you are knitting. When you reach the last stitch of your row, of your first row, please purl one stitch. And now we are ready to turn our project and knit our second row. So, and I'm ready to start my second row. What I need to do is to slip the first stitch into the right needle, and then I'm going to work the same way as in the first row. I'm going to knit the first stitch, I mean the second now, but the first one that I work, and I am going to slip the other one, and again I am going to knit this one and slip the other one on the right needle. When you knit, please always place the yarn behind the right needle and knit the knit stitch, and then place the yarn in front and slip the stitch which was supposed to be purled, and you continue in the same way until you reach the end of this row. I'm almost at the end of my second row. I have 4 stitches to go. Now I'm at the point where I should slip one stitch on my working needle and then knit one, then slip the next one, and because this is the last one, I'm going to purl this stitch in the regular way. And now I have finished my second row, but before I go on to my third row, which is going to be a round now, because I am going to join the sides of my project, there are some things that you need to know. So the first thing is that the cable of these circular needles is very long for my project, but there is a way to do it, and you don't have to buy different circular needles. You can adjust the cable in order to be able to knit your project. This is the first thing you should know. As I said, for this round I am going to join the sides of my project in order to create the neck for my dog sweater. In order to make it easier for you, what I'm going to do is to divide this cable into 3 parts. It doesn't have to be accurate, so in order to be easier for you, you can use another needle or a hook, but of course you can do it with your hand if you prefer. So what you do is create a big loop here, and then another loop like around here. If you prefer to be more accurate, you can divide the number of your stitches by 3, but you don't have to. You just need to create the loops. Let me show you now. So I have created these big loops with the cable of my knitting needles. These loops are too big because the cable is very long. I hope you don't have such a long cable. The next most important thing to remember is, first of all, to have your working yarn here on the right side and be free to use it. And the other most important thing is that all your stitches should be pointing in the same direction. So all the cast on stitches should be facing inwards like this. This is very important because if your stitches are twisted, then your project will be twisted too. And now we are ready to join my rows, because up to now I had knitted 2 rows, into a round in order to create the neck of my dog sweater. The first thing I'm going to do is to wrap the yarn around my neck. So I have the working yarn in my right hand and my needle with the stitches here, let's say. And what I'm going to do in order to join my stitches into a round is this. First, I'm going to slip the first stitch of my left needle on my right needle, and then I'm going to take this stitch, which is the last stitch on my right needle. I'm going to pull it up and I'm going to create a big loop, which I'm going to pass onto my right needle. You should also pull up your working yarn in order to make it more secure, and in this way I joined my stitches into a round, so I have the neck of the sweater. I joined the 2 sides of my project this way because in this way there won't be a gap created, or a hole, let's say, into my project. And now I'm ready to start the 3rd round. So now I'm going to insert the stitch marker here on my right needle, the working needle, and I will start knitting my stitches. The first one is a knit stitch, so I'm going to knit this stitch. The second one has to be a purl stitch, a knit stitch, a purl stitch, and I'll go like this until I reach the first loop of my cable, because then I will need to push the stitches near the tip of my left needle. Please knit until the loop and I will meet you then. And now I need to bring my stitches near the tip of the needle, so I pull the right needle like this, and I have my stitches here on the tip of my left needle, so I will continue knitting my rib stitch until I reach the stitch marker, which shows that this is going to be a change of the round.
When you finish knitting this round, please continue knitting rounds of 1 by 1 rib stitch until you reach the length you like for the dog's neck.
So I have knitted some rounds of the rib stitch. It's personal preference how many rounds of your rib stitch you are going to knit for the neck of the sweater. If you would like to use the maths, I know that in order to knit 10 centimeters in height, because this is the height, I need 16 rounds for the rib stitch. Because if it was a stockinette stitch, maybe the calculations would be different. So for example, if I would like my rib stitch rounds, meaning the neck of the sweater, to be, let's say, 8 centimeters, then I would have to knit 12.8 rounds. Of course, I cannot knit a decimal round, so I would round up to the next number, so I will have to knit 13 rounds. If you would like the neck to roll over, then you will have to knit more rounds. For me, I will knit about 8 centimeters, and I will meet you then to show how to knit
the next part of the sweater. So this is the end of the first tutorial. Please join me to the next one. See you then.